CALDO just in hell still. We're gonna bring it back. Just be patient. Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Kil Moon record, Universal Themes. Kil Moon is the singer-songwriter project of one Mr. Mark Kozelek, who had a pretty fantastic 2014 with the release of the album Benji, a record which I believe was his sixth under the Kil Moon name, and has essentially brought his very lengthy career its second or third wind. And Mark is now taking advantage of that wind by releasing this new LP over here just about a year after Benji. But with Universal Themes, it doesn't really sound like Mark is trying to give us another Benji, even though this new LP does have commonalities with his last album, which was a series of fantastically written songs which came off sort of like these casual, laid-back stories with a lot of very morbid and sad themes. And I guess Universal Themes is building off of Benji in that we get a series of tracks that sound even casualer. On Universal Themes, Kozelek doesn't really seem obsessed with his own mortality, the mortality of his loved ones. Really what we're kind of getting is a peek into the everyday life of Mr. Kozelek. And that everyday life involves performing, seeing friends perform, traveling, firing bandmates, relaxing and watching HBO, spitefully responding to detractors, and there's also the opening track on here where Mark sort of seems to be focusing on the last moments of a possum that he sees sort of fatally injured. With so many mundane details weaved into the stories of these tracks, the songs can get kind of lengthy. I mean, you know, you're getting 7, 8, 9, 10-minute songs, one after another on this LP. And there are some almost unpredictable musical shifts in a lot of these songs as well, some of which don't really make that much sense from a compositional standpoint, but the reason that maybe these sudden shifts in tempo or melody occur might be a little clearer to you if you just pay closer attention to the lyrics. Usually what occurs on this record is that the music is really just kind of enhancing the storyline or highlighting some kind of shift in emotion or place or focus. Kind of like on the song The Possum, where right after the mention of church bells, after the possum's death, we kind of get this very pretty guitar interlude. Or we have the guitars and the drums going a little harder, as well as Mark Kozelek screaming his brains out on the verse of that song where he is describing experiencing the Godflesh concert. So there is most certainly flow to the songs and the narratives on this record, but the tracks often obsess over these really minor details, get bogged down in them to the point where it's kind of hard to see whatever the bigger picture or point of these songs are. Sometimes I would even argue there isn't really that strong of a point. To go back to the song The Possum again, I mean, we do have the song starting to focus on this possum and its very likely death later in the song, but then this narrative is sort of derailed in favor of talking about this Godflesh concert and then kind of settling down and relaxing and watching TV at the end of the day. And maybe sort of the point of that is to sort of show that even though this thing's death is right around the corner, life just kind of continues to go on. At least that's how the song reads to me, but still, even then, I kind of feel like I'm stretching to pull meaning out of this track. Again, I think the point of a lot of these songs is to not really have that strong of a point. And in that respect, I actually think this record is kind of experimental. I often think a lot of singer-songwriter music is sort of interpreted or portrayed as being way more authentic and organic and true to life than it really is. At the end of the day, I mean, what a lot of singer-songwriters are doing are giving us these romanticized or exaggerated or abridged moments of real life set to music. What Mark Kozelek is giving us on this record is, you know, as much as he can, pretty much every unimportant detail within a particular situation. Mark spares no details on this record as
little tidbits of like a run-in with Jane Fonda and a conversation with her, as well as a bit of an exchange with an Indian gas station worker, are peppered into narratives that don't really have anything to do with these two moments. They are just kind of little detours that occur within the larger picture, which I think is where the title of this album comes in, Universal Themes. I mean, each little section of each song on this album is kind of a point in time, a theme, a moment, and they are universal in that it feels like Mark is just trying to shove every single thing that he can think of into these songs. I mean, we're talking about just comprehensive accounts of everything that happened between whenever the song starts and whenever the song ends. And this lyrical approach is used on pretty much every single track here, like Birds of Films, the next track on here, where Mark is singing or talking about, because there's quite a bit of, I guess, spoken word over music in the background on this album, just kind of working on a movie set where he says in the song, I guess he's playing himself. And the music on this track, it's not terrible, but I guess in a sense it's kind of forgettable because it just seems like it's a bit of a side dish or just a background element for Mark to just kind of tell a story over it, and not necessarily a riveting one at that. However, there are sonic elements to this track that I think are nice, like the numerous layers of fluttering acoustic guitars that kind of bring the song from one section to another as Mark kind of, I don't know, introduces us to little bits of information like it's been 6 to 8 weeks since he's had iced tea or something. The song With a Sort of Grace, da-da-da-da-da, brings the record to its first big momentous sonic change in that we're getting some strong drumming here and some electric guitars as well. And Kozelek is aggressively shouting the song's lyrics over this instrumentation. And I mean, it's a welcome change of pace just to kind of hear something a little bit more upbeat and aggressive, but I don't really care for the sound of this track. I mean, I think the drums and the guitars are recorded a little shoddily. It sounds kind of demo-ish, and Mark Kozelek shouting doesn't really sound that great and kind of makes the lyrics on this track unintelligible at some points. And again, just the performance here, just the cracking of his voice and just kind of the monstrosity that is Kozelek trying to scream his vocals just does not go over that well. I think a lot on this track, musically and lyrically, gets a little lost in translation. And this isn't the only song that goes aggressive and goes electric on this record. We have the track Ali / Sphinx 2, where the yelpy vocals and the vocal melody, as well as the electric guitars, which have kind of a twang to them, make this track kind of feel like an early Modest Mouse demo, and not a particularly good one. This was maybe the only track on the record that once it began, I just could not wait for it to end. And I kind of get a Modest Mouse vibe as well during some of the vocal passages on the closing track to hear too. Still, on the closing track here, I think this album dishes out some of its most interesting stories, kind of talking about Mark in Sweden, touring, going through a series of just dramatic events, but titling the track after this one moment where he meets somebody who works at a gas station, which I think highlights, again, the point and the message of this album, just to kind of focus on these otherwise uninteresting moments and situations. Also in the track listing here, I do enjoy the incredible reality check on the song Cry Me a River, Williamsburg Sleeve Tattoo Blues, which is not only a hilarious song title, but a hilarious song, where I think Mark is directly taking a shot at everybody who has been talking about him, writing think pieces about him over the past year online, over his kind of aggressive and offensive stage banter. And Mark essentially responds to people decrying him as being toxic and problematic and horrible by bringing up all of these life experiences from himself, from other people, things he's seen that are actually, like, truly horrible. I mean, you know, you're not really going to beat Mark Kozelek at the depressing game, because he's always going to be more depressing. And the refrain on this track is actually kind of catchy despite being so bulky, and I like the guitar melodies on here too. It's one of the few tracks in the track listing here that actually feels pretty focused. It's I guess in a sense, a bit of a part 2 to the War on Drugs, Suck My Cock. But even though I do like this song, it does highlight a few issues. Number one, how easily music journalists can be trolled by a grumpy old Red House painter. And two, how easily Mark Kozelek can get kind of unfocused on what makes Sun Kil Moon good and just get bogged down in tedious squabbling with his detractors. I mean, it's so easy to offend those whose buttons can easily be pushed. I mean, there's really no challenge in it. It's kind of like just shooting fish in a barrel. So why Mark continues to do it, I'm not totally sure, because at least, for me as an outsider who just enjoys his music, it hasn't really, led to an entertaining album here. As far as what this album is doing at its core with universal themes, I most certainly get it. And again, I think it's a novel and pretty experimental idea, but I think this album ends up suffering musically because of it, because the songs, the melodies, just the background instrumentation is so much less interesting than it was on Benji. But really, this LP, I guess what wrecked it for me were kind of the more aggressive and electric tracks. I mean, as a result of going down this road, this album does dish out at least several lackluster songs, and with there just being 8 very lengthy tracks in the track list here, Mark really put all of his eggs in too few baskets by there just being so few songs here, and many of them just being extended far beyond the point of interesting. I'm feeling a light to decent 6 on this thing. Tran? Zishin, if you've given this album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, Kil Moon. Forever.